Welcome to Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose. I'm Deremy Dove, and I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jose Ruiz. And Jose, we're doing something that we've done before on our podcast, on our YouTube feed before, but this is it's never easy to do this, but this one is really it's different in a way because the other people there's no perfect people,
Right.
but the other people we've done, they're put up more on a higher pedestal. We've talked about John Madden or Bill Russell, but we're looking at the death of Pete Rose. Pete Rose died earlier today, and a man who is very complicated, has a complicated legacy, and especially when you look at the ball player Pete Rose, it's not complicated how great of a player he was, but as an ambassador to the game, as a person, very complicated, and this is, it's never easy to talk about someone when they pass, but this is not the easiest to really sum up Pete Rose's legacy for us.
Yeah, it's even if he didn't pass, it was a difficult conversation, right? When you try to break down his long career, we were just joking, and he played 24 seasons. That's a long time, man. But even doing just an episode on Pete Rose, it's difficult, because again, you want to talk about the amazing player that he was, and we all an all-time hits king and things like that, and champion, multiple World Series champion, and it's just a great player all around. But it's definitely sometimes overshadowed by a lot of the off the field stuff, and just that conversation, it's tough sometimes. But again, it sucks when you have to do an episode like this on, and the reason why we're doing it is because he passed today, and it's just, I understand, like you mentioned there, I mean, like, people are not perfect and he made mistakes, but we definitely want to make sure we took our time and shouted him out today.
Yeah, and talked about everything, the good and the bad, because it's hard. It's hard where you're going to look at Pete Rose, and all-time hit king should be the first thing that we say. But we know, that's really, in the second paragraph.
Yeah.
We're going to look to 1989 and that lifetime ban, and should he be in, shouldn't he be in, and all those things. That's what you're going to see in all the obituaries about Pete Rose, and you have to look at it. The truth is, there's no one's fault but himself.
Yeah.
That's the sad part. There's no one else's fault. No one forced him to bet on baseball, but he did. And honestly, a lot of people say, if you look back in the late 80s and 89 with Bart Giamatti as the commissioner of baseball, if Pete would have admitted to betting on baseball, even back then, that he would have had a lifetime ban for a little bit, but then he would have been in the Hall of Fame. But at that point, I think it was 15 years before he even publicly admitted it, like in an interview with Charlie Gibson. So it was just a lot of self-inflicted wounds that really kind of kept hurting Pete Rose.
And he admitted it. And then the thing is, a lot of people were saying, he admitted it because it was a book coming out,
Right.
or something like that. And it was just, even when he admitted it, it was always still for a personal gain, let's just say, and fair or not fair, but it did look like that, and he was even questioned on that. And there was a great documentary that came out on Max, by HBO Max, and he put him right back kind of in the spotlight a little bit. And I know we both were really excited. We talked about it on the show, this documentary coming out, and we're big documentary buffs. And as again, his greatness was definitely talked about, but a lot of the stuff that you would hear and read about him off the field, really, to me, Deremy, stuck out a lot in this documentary. And some and the other things were coming out in this documentary about how he lived his life and things. And it was tough to watch that, to be honest with you, Deremy. And it's just man, this guy still to this day, has some issues, man, that he was dealing with. And hopefully, he did deal with them and got good with them. But this is a very controversial topic, this Pete Rose, or just overall, and no matter what era you're in, today's era, 80s, 90s, 2000s, you talk about Pete Rose, it's going to be controversy in that discussion.
And no matter what happens in the future, it's going to be tainted now because he's not
Yeah,
here to see it.
right.
And I guess if he does wind up being elected in and they take that away, I guess it'll be something maybe for his family, his kids and his grandkids. But even I don't want to say how they feel because I'm not in their shoes, but it won't be the same because he's not here. But it's just difficult because and I think the documentary did a good job. The docuseries that came out, called Charlie Hustle, because the reason why the gambling story is such a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal to bet on baseball. Like, no matter who you are, it's a big deal. But the documentary did a good job of bringing up Pete Rose, the player, is so iconic, and he's in that pantheon of just as a player. And I mean, not saying if you want to talk about, he's a high-ranking all-time great player,
Yeah,
but just a name value and iconic. You look at like a Ted Williams, a DiMaggio, a Hank Aaron, a Willie Mays. Pete Rose is in that category. Before the gambling, he was that iconic. Charlie Hustle is one of the most iconic nicknames in all
yeah,
sports.
yeah,
Like,
and definitely
he,
earned. Yeah.
yeah, he was an iconic player, and also for a guy who wasn't a home run hitter, that's what was even more impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. In an era where guys, you mentioned a few of those names were hitting 40 home runs and, still hitting 330 and things like that. Like, his game was a game where just your average person can relate to. You know what I mean? Like, again, the Charlie Hustle piece, like how important that was and how he played the game. And you always hear, especially old school, baseball fans on like, you got to play the game right. And people would say he played the game right, and he hit a ground ball to shortstop. He's just hustling to first base, and a lot of times, you see it a lot, especially now, like, players don't do that. You know what I mean? You hit a ground ball and it's like an easy out. They'll just jog to the bag. And sometimes the first baseman will drop the ball, things like that. And they're getting crushed on like sports radio and things like that. And with Pete Rose, you didn't have to worry about that. You walking him, he's hustling. It's a pretty strong jog to first base, and it's just that type of energy and things like that he brought to some great teams that he played on. That's why a lot of people just loved him.
Well, you talk about Charlie Hustle. I know as a kid, I won't speak for you. Pete Rose had been retired when I came. When I was like 2 years old when he got banned. But one of the first stories I heard was the 1970 All-Star game, and it's an All-Star game. And I mean, it was more serious back then than it is now, but still, it was an exhibition. But it's a tied game. Ray Fosse's the catcher to throw to the plate. Pete Rose runs him over, and it was like he never was the same. And the documentary brought up, like, well, was he never the same, or he was hurt? But that wasn't the reason, and which was good to bring up because I always heard the myth was, and that's one thing about it. Pete Rose had a mythology about him.
Yes, he
There
did.
was a mythology, like he cared that much. Charlie Hustle, he ran over his Ray Fosse. He was a buddy of his, and he didn't care. He wanted to win an All-Star games, an exhibition, and he ruined his career. And it wasn't like poor Pete Rose. It was he's a gamer. The way people talk about Michael Jordan stories about he's crazy competitive, and it's like usually you should look at him and say something mentally is wrong with Michael
Yeah,
Jordan, really, like with some of this stuff. But we look at it like he gets praised for it. Pete Rose had the same thing, Jose.
yep,
No one was like, "Why did Pete Rose do that?" It was like he cares that much, and that's just
yeah.
what was crazy about it.
Yo, not a funny story, but a quick story. Like I don't know if it was in high school or maybe a different league I played in, but I was a teenager though, obviously. And long story short, I had a friend of mine who ran over this dude at home plate. And like you said, like by that point in time, Pete Rose has been retired. You know what I mean? Like, and I remember the first thing somebody said was, "Oh, he thinks he's Pete Rose." Like, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, and it's just, it still was in people's minds. Like, not only that play, but the way he played. You know what I mean? Like, and it's there's some guys, and we talk about this all the time, Deremy, on the show, where it's like the Bo Jacksons or Michael Jordans or like the Wayne Gretzky's, like these guys who have these stories that, true or not, we don't know. They just sound true. Like, like
Right.
Wilt Chamberlain's another guy. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
and it's just, you hear all these stories that like stuff that they've done and things like that. And it's just like, to me, it's all true. You know what I'm saying? Because it's based off the greatness of the player. And Pete Rose is in that rare category, that guys that you hear so much stuff about and you're just like, yeah, it's Pete Rose. It's probably true.
No, absolutely. And you look at it, what was amazing about him, and man, what just hurts is he's a part of. Argue, you can make a case it's the greatest team in baseball history. I
Yeah.
think for sure it's the greatest lineup.
Yeah.
1 through 8, you give it like greatest lineup in baseball history. That big red machine and where he fit in on it, and what I love about that team is I think there was a big four, and all those guys are great players.
Yeah.
But there's a big four, and I'll say this: I think Tony Perez of the big four, I would never think he's the best player.
No.
But the other three, Rose, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, what I think is crazy. You can make an argument for any of those three who was the best player on those teams. You can,
Yeah.
and you're not crazy if you say it's Joe Morgan, if you say it's Johnny Bench, or if you say it's Pete Rose.
And the crazy part is, in each of their positions, you can make an argument that they're the best of all time at their positions. Definitely Johnny Bench,
Mm-hmm.
and George Morgan, probably the best second baseman of all time. And wherever you want to stick Pete Rose at, first base, outfield, third base, wherever, not third base, but anywhere else, like he's up there where he might be the best player in that position. So that team to me is the best team of all time, or one of the top three best teams of all time. And he was a huge part of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was definitely a huge part of that. And, we could talk about him leaving there and going to the Phillies and being a huge part of that, and being a huge part of that city and that organization, still to this day. You know what I'm saying? They talk about Pete Rose, but man, like him being a Cincinnati kid and homegrown and going to the Reds and being so great there, man, that city adored Pete Rose.
Yeah, he was the fan favorite.
Yeah.
And there was something about him where, and like, we love the home run. We love the deep ball, right? But man, for a guy, like I said earlier, wasn't a home run hitter, he was just exciting. He was a gamer, and you just couldn't take your eyes off watching Pete Rose. And I think that's what gets me is baseball is interesting. We talk about clutch pitching a lot of times. I feel like clutch hitting, we kind of pick and choose when we want to talk about that with people. But we hear with Jeter how clutch of a player he was, and
Mm-hmm.
Jeter was a clutch player.
Yeah.
But Pete Rose, to me, is the ultimate clutch player in baseball. I think for everyday position guys, Pete Rose defines that. He was just clutch, and you talk about a guy. You didn't have to even question Jose. Did he love that spotlight? Did he love being up at the big at bat? He reveled in it. He loved being in that big moment.
Yeah, that was a big reason he went to the Phillies after, playing with the Reds. Like, he knew that they were on the cusp of, like, they needed a player to get over the hump, and he knew it. He said it himself. He knew I was going to be that player, and he came in here and did exactly that. You know what I'm saying? Like, in big moments, we talk about, that 80s NLCS against Houston, and that, I know you talk about that series all the time as being probably one of the best series of all time. And his at bat against Nolan Ryan, you know what I'm saying? Like, drawing that walk and knowing how big it was, he even reacted to it. And it's just, again, the spotlight. And we just did an episode on the '04 Red Sox and Yankees, and we talked about that a lot, in that episode, where players, shrinking in those moments or stepping up in those moments. And like you said there, I mean, like Pete Rose, that's something you never had to worry about. And, even if, his numbers are amazing, but you were right. He had 160 home runs in his career. He played 24 seasons. So, definitely not a home run hitter. And that's the sexiest part of baseball, right? Like, hitting home runs, guys hitting 315, 320, 200 hits. It's a great player, but that's not very sexy. So he was that. and he was more than that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that
Mm-hmm.
again speaks to his greatness. 2-time Gold Glove winner, played everywhere. Played every position, probably except catcher, maybe, and pitcher. Like, so he was, again, was not your prototypical superstar, but he was definitely the superstar of the
He,
league.
like you said, 17 All-Star appearances in 5 different positions: second
Yeah,
base, left field, right field, third base, and first base. 3 batting titles, and he all-time leader in hits, but also in games played, in
yeah,
at-bats, in singles and outs. So, Willie Mays, and we didn't do an episode on Willie Mays, but he died a couple months ago, and there was talks, which I thought was interesting. All the Dan Patrick, Rich Eisens, ESPN, who now Willie Mays, and I think rightfully so. Willie Mays had the title. I thought it was a battle with him and Hank Aaron for years.
yeah.
And when Hank passed, it was definitely Willie. But when Willie died earlier this year, who is the best living player in baseball? The living legend. And you heard names. You heard Mike Schmidt. We did an episode
Mike
on Mike
Schmidt.
Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
You heard Ohtani. I heard Sandy Koufax. I heard Pete Rose.
Yeah.
And you could make a case that in these few months since Willie Mays passed before he died, you could call Pete Rose. He was the best living player of all time.
Yeah, I mean, just if you look at his numbers, for sure. I mean, I know Koufax and Mike Schmidt would. It's a good argument. You know what I mean? Like, because you're looking at potentially, well, for sure, the best third baseman of all time, but potentially the best starting pitcher of all time, and or one of them. But Pete Rose, again, like, he's the greatest hitter of all time. You know what I mean? Like, and the numbers speak for themselves. And I know people say, yeah, he played 24 years, so of course he's gonna. No, 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 no. Like, 3 batting titles, 17-time All-Star in 25 seasons. Like, that's very, very impressive. And he was always playing. You know what I mean? Like, he was always available. Again, you always hear like the best ability is availability. You never had to worry about that with Pete Rose. You know he was going to be able to play 140, 50, 60 games a year and play all out. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I know, like, that's like, I don't say it's overrated. You know what I'm saying? Like, but like, I know for certain guys, I can remember like a Chase Utley or something like that. Like, they're elevated. Scott Rowlands and with the Philly, I'm just talking Phillies players here, but they're elevated in historical purposes because like fans love them so much. You know what I'm saying? Like, especially like the Chase Utleys of the world, where they're always hustling and trying to extend singles and doubles, and fans just love that in certain cities. You know what I'm saying? Philadelphia being one, Cincinnati being one. Like, but this is the guy where it all started at. You know what I'm saying? Like, not to say players ain't hustled before him, but he made it like a popular thing, and
Absolutely.
he did it. He did it very well.
I mean, I think the only comparison, not that they're in their greatness, their comparison, because Pete Rose was a greater player in his sport than this guy in his sport, but I can think of I guess there's two. You Rodman in
Yes.
basketball in popularizing rebounding and
Yep.
defense in a way that it wasn't popular before. And with this other person, you can say he rivals Pete Rose, but Deion Sanders
Yeah.
and what he did for corner, people didn't look at corners like they knew it was valuable, but like he put being that shutdown corner on another level of popularity.
Yep.
But to your point, Pete Rose did that, in baseball. You have to look at it, right, Jose? Because in 1979, he's the hottest free agent. All these teams want him, and he's talked about the Cardinals, Mr. Bush, who owned them, he offered him like a brewery, like
Yeah.
and horses. He got all these big offers as everyone wanted Pete Rose. And to your point, people saying that he played for so long, he was 38 years old in '79 when he's going to turn 38. So 37 going on 38 as that hot free agent.
Yep.
That says something that no one was like, he's past his prime, he's done. Everyone wanted him, and it was a big deal when the Phillies got him because Charlie Hustle was that great. And when you see him play for the Phillies in 79, 80, 81, he's got a spring in his step
Yes.
like he's 23. Like, it's amazing to see him going after trying to steal bases. Like, you don't think he's 38 going, about to be a 40-year-old big leaguer. Like at a time when 40, now 40 is impressive, but modern medicine, okay. Back in the early 80s, like 40,
Yeah.
it should have been done.
I mean, luckily for him, he wasn't this home run hitter or, this big steals guy or like, you know what I mean? Because then at that point, like those skills deteriorate the older you get. You know what I'm saying? Like he was just put the ball in play. But the thing is, like his style of play doesn't lend to a long career. You know what I'm saying? Like guys get hurt all the time, and
Right.
you know what I'm saying? Like these guys who so-called, busted up the line and, always hustle and, running things out. They're the ones that always get hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it's just some of those players there, I guess, man, where God is just like, nope, you're going to be all right for a long time. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it just skill meets opportunity, I guess. I don't know, man, but some of these guys just I don't know if it's luck. You know what I'm saying? Like, cause I'm sure he prepared and did what he had to do, but man, like to
I,
play the way he played and play that long is
I
impressive.
mean, there's definitely, I think, yeah, luck or we'll say good fortune because freak injuries can happen to anyone. So the
Right.
fact that he didn't have a lot of those or too many, but I do think there is something about it. We always hear it's a business. It's a business. Sports, when you get to that level, and it is. It is a business. And Pete Rose handled. I mean, he knew his worth, and he wanted to get paid. That's why he left Cincinnati, and he was a high paid player. You watch the documentary; it talks about the money he was getting, but he always, and to me, way more than even like the say hey kid, like just like Pete Rose played with like a youth, like a
Yeah.
little leaguer kind of youth. Like I feel like that's what kind of added to it. Like you didn't get like a grizzled down veteran. Like
No, I had his hair bouncing around, running
yeah,
around all crazy. Yeah.
like we both love Mike Schmidt, greatest third baseman ever. And if I had to pick, I would put him over Pete when Pete was alive. In
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
time, fight for the best living player, but it's close. And Pete influenced Mike's career. Like Mike Smith says, he wouldn't be where he was without Pete Rose. So credit to Pete on that. But Mike Schmidt definitely, you could tell the business side of baseball got to like the big league, being a professional, and all that comes with that. You could see it wore on him, right?
Yeah.
You never got that with Pete Rose. You never got that with him. Like I felt like Pete Rose could play in the World Series, and then if he saw me, you, and a couple other guys playing a game in some old baseball diamond, he'd drive by in his Bentley and he'd go, "I'll
Jump
play
right
with you
out.
guys," and like
Yeah.
he'd play too. Like that's what Pete Rose gave you every game, every night.
And the thing is, like, it was not fake either. Like, you
No,
know what I'm saying? Like, and again, we did an episode on the '04 Red Sox Yankees, and we talked a lot about that as well. That even some certain great players, you could see like they had to fake it to like get a fans appreciation and things like that. I think a player like Pete Rose was the opposite. It was just so natural to him and how hard he played that fans just loved him. You know what I'm saying? In Cincinnati and Philly, anywhere, any of these fans, like it's just something about a player who plays like that. You know what I'm saying? Like there's teams that play like that where you're like, man, this team is so gritty and they're always like, especially I know in hockey terms, like they're mucking it up and things like that. It's just fans appreciate that. Like where you have a guy busting his ass out there. And like to your points there, I mean, like where he's having fun doing all that. You know what I mean? Like you root for guys like that, and the fans love them, and fans rooted for him.
I mean Carlton Fisk says it. Game 6, 75 World Series. Many call the greatest game ever, right? And they're going in the extra innings and Fisk behind the plate. He says Pete Rose is up there. And he goes, "Can you believe this, Fisky? This is the greatest game ever. This got to be the greatest game." And Fisk is like, "What? Like, what?"
Yeah,
He's like, "This is the greatest. Come on, man! It's the greatest game ever." And the Reds lose that game. And Sparky Anderson, the manager of the Reds, he's walking around Boston worried like we're going to lose another World Series. And he says he bumps into Pete Rose. He goes, "That was the greatest game ever, right, Skip?" He's like, "What? You talking about the greatest game ever? We got Game 7. We could have won it. We didn't win it." He's like, "Oh, we're going to win tomorrow night." But that was a great game. Like, and that was who Pete Rose was.
yeah,
Like, that's him. And what I think about a couple things, right, that aren't just like, oh, a big hit. I think about, yes, that game 5 of the 80 NLC as the deciding game, and it's the bases loaded. It's the 8th inning against the great Nolan Ryan, and Pete Rose just up there, confident, cocky, knows he's going to get something. Is battling Nolan, and two all-time greats battling,
Yeah,
and then he forces that walk, and then that Nolan Ryan brings in a run from that, and the way he flips that bat at his dugout, and then he's giving words like "Let's go," probably
yep,
"Let's bleep and go" or something like that against Nolan Ryan.
yeah,
It's just unbelievable. And like, it's a walk. It's not a hit that I think about. Like, but that was so clutch and such a defining thing that helped get the Phils that win and get them to the World Series. But I think about also, Jose, Game 7 of 75, and Joe Morgan gets that big hit, and Pete Rose is on base, which is huge. And Joe gets the hit, and you see Pete sliding in the third, and the look of happiness he has for his best friend Joe Morgan getting that hit, and how excited. And I thought that's why Joe Morgan loved him all those
yeah,
years, and Tony
yep,
Perez did, and a lot of those Ken Griffey Sr. and George Foster, as flawed as he is and was. That right there, seeing how big smile. If you watch that clip, that smile he's got, and he's giving his hand clapping for his buddy, Joe Morgan, getting that hit to put them up in Game 7 of the World Series. Like, those are the two things I think about that shows Pete Rose the player, in my opinion.
right. He seemed like a great teammate. You know what I mean? Like he seemed like a great teammate. You talked about like the cockiness. Like he was borderline very cocky, you know what I mean? And like, and not, you know what I'm saying? Like, and just the way, I mean, obviously the way he talked about himself was a little arrogant, but that's fine. Like, you can do that when you have close to 43,000 hits in your career. But you mentioned Mike Schmidt and how he helped Mike Schmidt. The one thing he gave Mike Schmidt a ton of was a lot of this confidence. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was telling Mike Schmidt, you're the best player in the league right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you
Yeah,
got to start playing like this. And, you talked about Sparky Anderson and having that conversation. And it's just like, no, we're gonna win it. And it's just like that stuff from potentially your best player on the team. That rubs off on you, man. And like you're like, man, this dude thinks we're gonna win. Like I'm gonna play a little better, man, for this guy. And you see him again to your point again, Deremy, where it's like he's so excited for his teammates, man. Like that's a great teammate to have, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, but not only for him to be a very good player, great player, and to be a teammate like that, it's just there's no wonder why these guys were they spoke of him so much at a time where people were like, "What? You crazy? Like this dude's betting on baseball." It's just like no, like they always had his back for the most part, and this is why. Like he was such a great teammate.
well, you see, also, which I had always known, the documentary says it. He learned, what he did for Mike Schmidt, Frank Robinson did for him.
Yep.
And Pete Rose came up with Cincinnati. His rookie year is 1963, and that's not that far from Jackie Robinson. That's
Yeah.
16 years integrating baseball. And Pete Rose was a blue collar, like you said, cocky kid. So a lot of the older white players didn't like him, but Frank Robinson and some of the other black players showed Pete how to be a pro, but also brought him in, hung with him. And guess what it was just the funny part about prejudice and racism. Now you didn't want him around you when he came up, but then this white guy's hanging out with these black players. Whoa, you can't hang out with them. And Pete Rose said no.
Right.
These guys treat me like a human being. I'm going to hang out with them, and I always respected Pete Rose for that. Like these guys treat me. No, I'm going to hang out with these guys. So like there's things like that. Because Frank Robinson, we all know, God rest his soul, serious, intense dude
Yeah.
and an intense baseball guy, but he always backed up Pete Rose.
Yeah. And like people were surprised that him and Joe Morgan had that great relationship. You know what I'm saying? Like, and Pete was just that he was just a regular dude, man. Like Pete was the guy that you could just walk into a bar, he's just sitting there having a beer, and then like you said, like he sees some kids playing and some wiffle ball or something, and he's just gonna go out there and play with them. Like he was definitely a down to earth like type of dude. Like yeah, he was a little bit cocky, but he deserved to be, I think, in my opinion. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a player being a little cocky and believing in themselves. Because again, to what we are talking about, like that just goes and it just like oozes onto their teammates. But no, that's one thing I also respected a lot about Pete Rose. Even with Tony Perez, and they were really close. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, and it to me, man, like that speaks to the individual. I know he made a lot of mistakes, and I don't even want to say a lot. Well, he made some mistakes for sure. Like I'll just leave it at that. And but the man wasn't like a terrible individual overall, and that again, that says a lot about him.
No, I think I see and obviously we love sports, and you see it in other fields. When you look at just business, you look at entertainment, and what makes someone great in that field is also could be their downfall as a person, but it's
Yeah,
also what made them. I look at Pete Rose, look at LT, a Lawrence Taylor. I can look at MJ, Michael Jordan.
yeah,
What makes them great is also their downfall as people. A lot of times,
yeah.
Lawrence Taylor was wild, greatest defensive player ever, arguably. But all those things that I feel like made him that great on the field were his downfall off the field. I think the same for MJ and the same for Pete Rose. Pete Rose was like, I'm the ultimate gamer, I'm the ultimate winner. When I face that pitcher, whether it's Nolan Ryan or whoever, they ain't getting me out. And I think that cockiness, like what you were saying, led to, hey, and he says he bet for his teams to win. I don't know how much I
I don't
believe of
know.
that.
Yeah,
Let's just play hypothetical, say that's true. Even still, that shows the arrogance and cockiness. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm betting on my team to win. I don't care about that sign. I'm Pete Rose.
right.
I got this. And like, it helped him on the field. It hurt him off the field.
Yeah, no, that's a great point there. I mean, especially with using those guys, because again, if you take some of that away from them, they're not the same player. Like, that intangible is what made him great on the field. You talked about Jordan and the competitiveness and, you know, that drove a lot of him, but he tried to drive his teammates that way. That caused a lot of problems. And then off the field with the gambling and all that stuff as well for him. So, yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think when you have these guys who reach this level of fame and popularity and stuff, they just feel like they're above everything else. You know what I'm saying? Above rules, above the law at some point. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
and that that does catch up to you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't care who you are. And again, we're going to leave it on the hypothetical. I believe he bet on them to lose as well. I don't know how you can't do that. Like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, you're controlling it so much, and it's just the thing is this. It's easy for me to be like, man, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I might be jumping ahead, but when you really think
No, no.
about what he did, like, it's really bad. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and what I wrestle with a lot there, me, is like, you letting steroid guys in, then you might have to let this dude in. Like, but he had, it's just bad, like the way he was betting on baseball and how much influence you have on the game as a manager. But that's another
It's
conversation for sure.
it's hard, right? So you and I went to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2023, and you hear people say there's a museum part, and then there's the hall with the plaques.
Hmm.
When we walked through the museum with the exhibits, Pete Rose is well represented in that part.
Yep.
They have all the records that you and I have been naming. You see that in there, the big red machine, all those things. Pete Rose is in the museum, so it's not like Pete Rose. For those who don't know or haven't been which I will say this, like fortunate, lucky enough to go because that was
Yes.
awesome. And if you can go to Cooperstown. But I think a lot of times before, like when I was younger, I thought Pete Rose was like no, he wasn't
Yeah.
mentioned in there at all.
Yep.
But he is mentioned, but there's no plaque. When you get to the plaques, there's no Pete Rose. And I think what's interesting, you mentioned the steroid guys, and the cases with them is at certain points for some of these guys, steroids wasn't officially illegal yet. and then now it is, and all those things, where betting on baseball as a player manager still is illegal, but
Yeah.
our society has changed when it comes to sports gambling
Oh
so
yeah.
tremendously than it was in '89 when this came out, or '99, hell, even 2009. So it's kind of like flipped in that way. And I guess I want to ask you, the first part is, who do you think should get in? Because we have a Barry Bonds, a Roger Clemens, a Mark McGuire, and we'll throw in a Pete Rose. Do you think Pete should get in before the steroid guys or after?
That's so tough, man. I think all of those guys. I'll just take these three guys, right? Bonds, Clemens, and Rose. Like these three guys who arguably best at their positions for sure. Bonds to me is the best player of all time. Some say Clemens is the best pitcher of all time, and then we talked about Pete Rose.
You definitely have two top 10 guys, and
You're right.
maybe 3 of the 15. If you combine pitchers and every day, 3 of the 15 greatest players ever, you would say, right? I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
Pete
would.
Rose is a top 10 guy, but
Nah, I 15. I would give him
yeah,
top 15. Yeah,
yeah,
and it's like, but the gambling thing is so bad, and
it's bad.
yeah, and it's tough for me to get around that. Like I think that's tough, man. Like that's a tough question because I'm a huge, and we talked, and you know this, Deremy, but I love Barry Bonds. You know what I'm saying? Like I think Barry Bonds deserves to be in because I feel like, and even Clemens too. I think both of them had Bonds for sure had a Hall of Fame career. Clemens, I don't.
I I think Clemens did too.
Yeah, Clemens, yeah. I
They
was going to
both
say
were
that
Hall of
too.
Famers before that stuff.
Right, and so I think those two guys should get in. But you brought up a point that I was going to bring up as well, Jeremy, where it's like you have leagues now were sponsored by like DraftKings and sports bet, ESPN bet, like all these leagues now are the betting is like intertwined. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's it's no longer that huge gray area. It's like no, like guys bet. You can bet during the game. Like it's so much easier to kind of get involved in that I think you got to really start looking at just letting him in because yes, he made that mistake. That was a very bad mistake, man. But the way the things have shifted with sports betting, I think you have to kind of change the perspective on that.
But is there a gray area with betting on baseball?
As a
If you're
manager,
as a manager or player, I think that area is still not gray in today's game, right?
nah, it's not. It's not. It's not. I just that's what I'm saying. Like it's just really bad. Like if we had the Tim Donaghy stuff come out and they were officials, and that's just as bad too. Like, is you definitely have control of the game there. But who knows if Pete Rose, has a guy in the bullpen who's pitched 2, 3 days in a row and he's like, you know what? Like, I got $1,000 on this game. I'm going to put him out there for an inning just to see what happens. Like, you don't never know, man. And that's where for me it gets really, really cloudy.
And it's really cloudy, and I would put, because I'll speak for me. I'm biased because he's known for Cincinnati Red, but he did come here, and until 2008 was a big part of the only championship in Philly's history. So
Yeah.
there was a lore as us being from Phillies. I mean, from Philly. You see the Phillies hat. Like there was he was talked about. He had a lore here too, and so there was a personal bias a little bit for me because my people growing up, Pete Rose, they won the first name, Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton, Pete Rose,
Pete
like
Rose,
Dallas
yeah.
Green, the manager. So there's a little bit of bias there that it's like I want to see him in there because I love what he did for our franchise, for our city. I love watching him play. I love the stories. I love that he's such a gamer. And he's not the most physically big guy, but
Right.
it's just like he just feels like he's just tough. Like it's like, why do you think Pete Rose is tough? I don't know. He just feels like you ain't gonna
Yeah.
just whoop him. If you win, you got to put him down and keep him down. I love that stuff, but it's like Barry Bonds affected his body, you you could say he impacted the game, but not really. Like Barry Bonds is one guy, so he's
Yeah.
not going to beat a whole team by himself. It's still he never won a World Series. You know what I mean? Like not like he's a champion. Um, Clemens is a pitcher, and he has a big impact, but still he got beaten games too. You know what I mean? It wasn't like he was unbeatable after that. And also, as part of this stuff, it wasn't a banned substance for
Yeah.
part of that run. Like it was frowned upon. That's not the same in
No.
legality as it being banned. So that's where it's different. Every big league player and coach I've ever heard, past and present, there was a big sign.
Every clubhouse.
It was not a mystery. It wasn't like a gray. Oh, can't. Are you sure we can't? You know, lifetime ban. And so I would have to. It pains me because I have more of a connection to Pete Rose than I do Barry Bonds and a Clemens. I would have to say you can't put him in the Hall of Fame before those guys. It wouldn't be right, and it hurts me to say that, but you can't do it.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think he's ever getting in. Even though I know a lot of times when folks pass away, people have the tendency of like, all right, we can let him in at this point, and I don't see it happening. I think these steroid guys are going to have a really tough time getting in for years. You know what I mean? Like these old school baseball writers are not voting them in, and I think they have to get in first. That's my mindset on it. Not to say they have to do it that way. I think that's how it's going to play out. I think they're going to have to like soften their tone or whatever when it comes to some of these steroid guys, some of them, but the thing is, if you do it for some, you got to do it for all. Like, so and there's it's a long list of McGuire's, the Palmeros, like there's so many Sosa, like you have so many guys that are just waiting to see what's going to happen with that, if they're getting in or not. Then you got this guy like Pete Rose, and I don't see it happening. Maybe in our lifetime, I don't know, but it's going to take a lot to get him in.
We could take O.J. Simpson, who also passed away earlier this year, which is crazy. We're just losing,
Yeah, I know.
losing people. Could you say outside of O.J., is Pete Rose the greatest sports tragedy? Like we did our YouTube on Game 5 of the '94 Finals, and Tom Brokaw said a tragedy of Shakespearean proportion with OJ and the Bronco, and the epic fall that OJ from an icon to what he was the last 30 years of his life. It's hard to top OJ. It's a bigger fall in sports, and a lot of times in society, but
Right.
definitely in sports, a bigger fall than that. So we can't. Pete Rose can't top OJ, but minus OJ is Pete Rose number 2 as like the greatest
Yeah.
fall.
Yeah, because again, like we didn't see it firsthand, but Pete Rose passed the mom test. You know what I'm saying? My mom knew exactly who Pete Rose was and how great he was. And, you mentioned like some of the names that get brought up in the 80s teams, and he's top 2, top 3, and from that to him year after year after year lying about, betting and betting, and everybody was like, dude, just say it. And he was like, no, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And then if you didn't watch the documentary, his allegations, he was dating a 17-year-old girl, you know what I mean? Like, and I guess in Ohio, I think it was, where it's like 17 is like the legal age or whatever, like doesn't make it right. That's just whatever, my opinion on it. But like that doesn't look good, and he shows zero remorse for that. And man, it's just bad, man. Like it's just, his situation is, I would say number 2 to OJ, long story short.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it sad.
Right, right.
It just makes it sad. Like the '99, World Series, the All Century team
Yep.
with Hank Aaron. It was in Atlanta that and they named the players, and Pete Rose was on it, and they rightfully so. He
Yeah.
deserves to be on it, but people were wondering would he be allowed to be a part of it. That's how much this has been, where he wasn't allowed in ballparks, he wasn't allowed for a
Yeah,
lot of celebrations. He kind of was able to get to do that later, and that was kind of like, honestly, that was leniency in a
yeah,
way.
yeah,
Like, because he's supposed to be, you can't get in the park, you can't do anything with Major League Baseball, but he, was allowed to celebrate with some of his teammates and do certain things. But I'll say this, that 99 All-Century team, Hank Aaron's on the field in Atlanta, and that's Hank Aaron's city,
yep,
especially since he retired. That was his city. He had the number 2 ovation. Number 1 was for Pete Rose. And we never talked about this, but Jim Gray got a lot of flack for asking
yeah.
questions that night. Do you think that was fair that Jim Gray got flack, or do you think he was just doing his job asking Pete Rose those questions?
I think it was fair. I get he had to do his job. Don't get me wrong, but I think it was a time or place for that, and it was his first time really that I remember him being allowed in like a big moment like that for baseball. And he even said it. I don't understand why you bombarded me like this with all these questions. Like, and I get it. Like, I agree. Because he could have just had that moment. Then after all of that, like, hey, Pete, we want to interview you real quick. And then kind of like hit him there. But in the moment, he just had this really great moment, and the first thing that gets brought up is like, so, baseball gambling, like your band, it's just like, man, like he, Jim Gray, to be honest, shit on that moment. To be, even me watching it, I was like, damn, dude, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, just let him be, man. And it, again, you talked about that moment for Hank Aaron, that was taken away. I don't want to say taken away, but Pete Rose kind of stole the moment. And
Yeah,
then Jim Gray came in and just shit it all over it. So yeah, I don't think it was a right moment to do that.
I've gone back and forth, but I agree with you. I do. I think you're right. Like, I think he's right to ask the tough questions, like, and that is the tough part of it. I mean, we're not even journalists, but like, we've talked about that. Like, if we have a guest on, like, how do we
Yeah,
approach? Like, that's not what we want to talk about, real stuff. But then the press, so like, it's a tough job. If he maybe just would have asked it once, but he kept going and going and going, and for a long time that followed Jim Gray, in my
yeah,
opinion. Like, that
yeah,
hurt him. I mean, but to the flip side, the Pete's how iconic he was. I think the next game, Scott Brocious hits the game-winning home run, and Jim Gray wants to interview him, and because of how you treated Pete Rose, we're not talking to you. Like,
yeah.
and that shows the power of how big Pete was still. Like, you touched one of the game's all-time greats. You disrespected him. We're all shutting you. Like,
Yeah, he
that was
disrespect the
big.
game. Yeah,
Yeah, that was big. So, I mean, it's just a shame that this is how we're talking about him.
right.
And we can't just talk about how great of a gamer he was, how great of a ball player. It's a shame that when we went to Cooperstown, he's a locked first ballot Hall of Famer if he doesn't do
Absolutely.
this. And we probably both take a picture of his
Yeah,
plaque,
yeah,
and that's what's a shame about it. Like, but he did it to himself, and I think different than OJ, but like OJ, these should be a test or like a study in a lot of different things, and Pete Rose is like that too, in celebrity, in sport culture, in toxic masculinity, all these different things.
yes.
We need to talk about this and being like, this is what we need to learn from it. We put OJ, we put Pete Rose too high on a pedestal, and hey, as society, how do we not do that? We don't want to keep doing that. Like, that's wrong. Like, obviously, these guys weren't told enough. They weren't checked enough
Yeah, right.
while they played, and definitely after they played, and they harmed themselves and harmed other people along the way.
Yeah, and just like both instances, it's tragic, and then like the more you talk about it, it's like the more sense of sadness like you get. You're like, damn, man, like it's just so messed up. You know what I'm saying? Especially obviously the OJ stuff is on a different level, but in Pete Rose's situation, it's just like, man, like yes, he did it to himself, right? Like but it, it's like I look at it like the other way where it's like, say that doesn't happen. Like, how are, how do people look at Pete Rose? You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's just, he's to me, his personality and all of that, like I think he's still big in the game if none of this happens. You know what I'm saying? Like I think he's still important part of the game. I know he tried like the broadcasting and stuff. He was not good at it, but it's like he's around more. You know what I'm saying? Like he's in these bigger events. He's in these Hall of Fames and not down the street signing autographs. Like even that's like kind of like I don't know. Like it just rubbed me the wrong way where he's doing it literally on purpose. Like he's down the street doing that. But I just think he's so important and so iconic, even more if none of this happens.
To be fair, he was a little, what's the word I'm looking for? He was a little rough around the edges as a broadcaster. I enjoyed him.
I like when he talks about, especially like on MLB Network, when he talks hitting and stuff like that. I
Well,
like.
well, yeah, what he did like as an analyst, like we on our Red Sox, we talked about like the Cubs winning in 16, and he was on Fox for that run. I remember, and I enjoyed seeing him giving A Rod and Frank Thomas like busting them and everything
That
like
was
that.
cool. Yeah.
And I mean, how viral that video went of him with two other all time greats,
And
Frank
them just
Thomas
picking his brain.
and him. He's showing the hitting knowledge to them. And that thing got like millions of hits. That was viral that year.
Because they both
Like,
were like, wow. Like, you know what I'm
exactly.
saying? Like they were both in awe. And that's, I think, a part of it. What he was teaching them was amazing stuff. But
Well,
I think it's the person who was doing it too.
oh yeah, it was the person. But if you remember that video, hitting is hard. They say maybe the hardest thing in sports is hitting the baseball. He says stuff that was like, oh yeah, but he made it sound so simple.
Yeah.
He's like, if you're in a slump, what do? Move up in the box, move back in the box. And it should be like, duh. But
Yeah.
those two guys weren't like, oh yeah, of course. They were like, yeah, yeah. Like because you're trying. He's like, don't change your swing. He's like, you got to the big leagues. Like, why would you change it? Move up in the box, move back in the box. And I'm like, yeah, that's what you. Pretty much it. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what you should do. But like, how many times hitting coaches, you got to do all this and blah blah blah. He's like, move up in the box, move back in the box. Do
Yeah.
this, do
How
that.
many times you hear, oh, we had to adjust his swing a little bit, and he's like, no, 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 don't do that. Like, and who are we going to listen to? Like, I know hitting coaches been doing it for a long time, but I'm going to listen to Pete Rose.
Who's got more hits than anybody ever? Like,
Probably all hitting coaches combined and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. So it's just like, to your point, I think that's what it is about these guys. I'll tell a story real quick, but like I remember in high school, um, there was a guy in the grade above me who was like the most popular guy. He was a D1 level athlete. All the girls liked him and all that. And the grade above me was like known as like the worst grade. They were always in trouble with school, trouble with the law, all that stuff. And this guy, if he was smart, he was good in the classroom. If he had his head on straight and wasn't partying too much and getting into stuff, could have gone D1, could have done a lot of different things. But he wound up kind of going downhill after high school and kind of getting involved in stuff. And I remember my senior year, we talked to the principal, and me and my friends, we were having like a conversation about like, man, we feel like it's a school, we're divided. And we said this guy's name. I won't say it on here, but we were like, hey, remember him? Like, if he had enough influence, he could have changed the school. And my principal looked at us and said, he did. He did
Mm,
change the school. And what he was saying was he changed it for the worse.
right.
But he had the influence to change it for the better, but he changed it for the worse. And I think of a Pete Rose, think of an OJ, you could have done so much good for the
Yep.
sport, for society, with the influence, the power, the charisma that you have, but you made it worse. And that's where, for me, the sadness comes in.
Right.
You did make impact, but it was for the worse.
Right. And that's the tragic part of it. These tragedies where it's like these two guys, and again, we'll keep it on Pete Rose, where he's just was so iconic, and he was that, what I'm saying, like so iconic, and then made some terrible decisions, and then just pretty much ruined all of that. and I know people still love him and still keep him in high regards in terms of like, we talked about top 15 player, but you know, that's not getting talked about anymore. And we're going to probably, after we jump off here, we're going to, watch some TV and talk. They're going to talk a little bit of Pete Rose. And the first thing they're going to talk about is like, man, probably anyway, I'm assuming it's like, man, like, we wish he would have got in before he passed. You know what I'm saying? Like, and obviously that didn't happen. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but um, that should not be the first thing that's brought up. That shouldn't have been what Jim Gray was talking about in that interview. If they even interview him, if he wasn't, what I'm saying, he didn't have to deal with any of this stuff, but that's the first thing we all go to, unfortunately. But that he bought that, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's unfortunate. That's the unfortunate part.
It is, and I think it's good in life and in death to keep it real, and I think we try to do that here, where we talked about what made him great,
Right.
What made him awe-inspiring to people of that generation and people like us who were after that generation. Like, we talk about those things, but we talk about why that's not going to be the first paragraph in his obituary. And there's a reason. It's a lesson for me to remember always too. Like, we shouldn't be judged by one thing, but in society, a lot of times we are,
Yeah.
especially when it's that detrimental. So it's important to remember that, and important to keep it in check. We put these guys, and we're a sports podcast, sports history podcast. And we talk about these guys, but it's important to remember not to put them on that pedestal, because they're flawed people just like you and I, and they make these bad mistakes just like you and I do too. So it's important just to read where we keep these athletes at in our minds, and how we look at them is always important.
Right. No matter how great their performances were, again, we're all flawed individuals. And the problem is when they do something bad, it's just magnified by 100, you know what I'm saying? And it's in the limelight, and we make mistakes. It's like, we just got to deal with them. You know what I mean? Like, deal with those consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But, like these guys, again, we put them on that pedestal, and then they make mistakes, and then we can't wait to rip them down,
Yeah.
So that's the issue there. But in the case of especially Pete Rose, but both of the individuals we talked about, and OJ and Pete Rose, like, they brought themselves down, to be honest, and they made mistakes, different mistakes, obviously, but mistakes that you can't make, no matter who you are. So it's unfortunate, man. And then again, we talked about them because, again, rest in peace, Pete Rose. But I love that you talked about that, Deremy. I love that you mentioned that. We got it. We keep it real here in this podcast, bigger than the game, and we wanted to do that here today. You know what I'm saying? Like, and again, Pete Rose is an amazing player, and he's big time in Philly, and we love him here in Philly sports, but there were some issues, and unfortunately we got to talk about those too.
Absolutely. So, we rest in peace to Pete Rose, thinking about his family, the friends, teammates who knew him and loved him, and our thoughts, prayers are with those guys tonight. But it's gonna be this conversation and the thing is, he's that big, not just after his in the week or two after his passing, but and probably still every Hall of Fame time now.
Yeah.
He'll still get brought up, like, should Pete Rose be in the Hall? Like, that's not going to end, I think, just because he passed away. We'll still hear it every time they're looking at voting people into Cooperstown for the Hall of Fame. They'll still hear, should Pete Rose be in it? And it's a lightning rod topic, so it's not going to go away.
Nah, I agree. I don't think it is either. And I think he gets talked about more than these steroid guys. So that's why to me, it's going to be interesting, except probably Bonds, but it's going to be interesting to see how it is moving forward.
He gets talked about in a more, those old timer writers talk about him more positively.
Yes.
When Chris Mad Dog Russo, and I grew up listening to him, and he's on First Take now, and does
It's great
High
on First Take.
He is really good on First Take, and he's got High Heat. When he talks about the steroid guys, absolutely not. No, Stevie, no. Like, blah, blah, blah. But then with Pete Rose, he should be in. I see the DraftKings and blah, blah, blah. So, like, he's fine with Pete Rose, but Barry Bonds is a no. But Pete Rose it's fine. A lot of these guys, I wonder. I don't know where Bob Costa stands on it. He's
Yeah, I
another
don't know
one,
either. Yeah, I'm going to guess no.
but I know where he's at with the steroids. He's
Right.
very vehement. I know where he's at with that.
Yeah.
It's like steroids and Vince McMahon. I know he doesn't like those things, but it's like Pete
No.
Rose. I don't know about. So
Yeah.
I'm not
Nah.
sure. So
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good point. I'm not sure either, but yeah, I'm sure it's a no.
yeah, but so those old time guys are going to keep bringing him up, and I don't know if it's fair to say DraftKings, all these things, because I think that's different. It's still different. No,
It's
there's no
different.
gray area. That's I guess you can bet on this as a player or as a skipper. It's like that's still clear. You can't bet nothing.
And you see guys using DraftKings and betting on them getting caught, boom, year suspension. Like they're not playing with that. And these guys, the one guy I can't remember who it was, though his name. He was not like a real popular dude. I think it was the NFL or NBA, the NBA dude that played for Toronto. I forgot his name though. But he got caught doing that. He got a lifetime ban.
Yeah, he did. And because the NFL got was it Calvin Ridley? Was Ridley?
Really got caught, yeah.
Yeah, he got like a
Isaiah
year
Rogers too. Got
Yeah.
yeah, but this guy
So
played for Toronto. He wasn't like a big name guy, but he's done. Like done. So they're still not playing around with that.
well, you can't. I mean,
Yeah. Nope.
it shows baseball is still affected by Pete Rose and other
Yeah.
stuff and these steroid scandals. The NBA that hurt Tim Donaghy hurt for a while.
Yep. Yeah.
So you gotta nip it in the bud because you can't go through that again. So
Nah. And
they're
then
not here to
now
play.
people are like, especially like Twitter X world that we live in and TikTok and all that. Like, now people are saying like these games are rigged and the NFL is rigged and all that. Like, it's growing. That's growing some legs, man. And you gotta, if you start adding some gambling stuff to that, which they are doing, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a good look for sure. And
Mm-mm.
so you got to take care of that immediately.
I think, and especially the NFL. I kind of wonder what could take that down.
Yeah.
Like I felt like Ray Rice, since we're just being real here, Ray Rice was the closest in my lifetime. That whole debacle, and not just we can talk about Ray Rice and what he did, how messed up. That's another story.
Yeah.
How Roger Goodell and the NFL handled Ray Rice. That's the story. How much of a debacle that was, and that was like the biggest. I was like, ugh, I don't know if they can handle. Like
Yeah.
they're taking some bad hits right now as like a league, but they survived and they're thriving. But I do think if there's one thing that could, if like you get a bunch of players and coaches from different teams in a gambling ring thing, I know I'm checking out.
Yeah. Or some referees, man. Like,
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I love the NBA. I know you do too. I looked at it real sideways when
yeah.
Tim Donnie. I was like, yo, and I'm like, some of Shaq and Kobe's titles. I don't know if y'all should be having them and stuff. Like, took a
Yeah.
while for me to kind of like get back into it. I'll say probably fully trusting again. I don't say fully, but probably once Adam Silver came in. The
Yeah.
rest of David Stern's time, I was not feeling him.
Yeah. It's rough. And you start seeing stuff, and especially the NFL, these flags come in, and, a lot of people are like saying the league is like pushing the Chiefs. So, they're getting a lot of different calls. And I don't know if that's true or not, but there's some games where I'm like, man, that's definitely looks suspicious, and I don't know if it's true or not. I just think like I try not to think like that because it's going to just ruin the experience for me. But there's moments where I'm like, I don't know. They made a good point there. So
Sometimes, yeah, I'll say this: enough's happened where I don't think it's just dumb conspiracy.
yeah,
Like at its root, I think some people may twist it. They want Taylor Swift, so they're throwing flags to keep. I'm like, I'm not getting all that, but like we know in sports, you give stuff to your superstar. That's what I look at, not Taylor Swift.
right,
Because if she's dating the backup kicker or punter,
yeah,
she's still going to be shown and stuff like that. But I look at like Travis Kelce is a star. Pat
Mm-hmm.
Mahomes is a big star. So we know in all these sports, the refs
Yeah.
they lean toward the stars.
They get
They
different
want,
whistles. Yeah.
yeah. So like that is where I look at it, not Taylor Swift, but Pat Mahomes is like you could say the face of the NFL right now. Him or
Absolutely.
Travis Kelce.
Him with Kelsey. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, things are gonna be a little bit different. So you have to watch that. And it's just interesting on it. But uh, and gambling was around before Pete Rose,
Yep.
and there was gambling issues before, so he wasn't the first one to have it, but he was definitely the highest profile. And it's just I don't know how I feel, Jose, because if I'm being honest in this conversation, he doesn't deserve to get in, but I can't lie and say there was a part of me while he was alive that I wanted to see him get in.
I know.
And
Me
so
too.
I feel like mixed because I feel like they might let him get in. And then I think that what's the point in that
It
then?
diminishes it. Yeah.
Yeah, you should have done it when he's alive. So I'd rather you not put him in at all, honestly, from a fan, than it's like you put him in next 5 years. Then I'm going to be like, you should have done it 20 years ago then when the dude was
Right.
alive.
Right. Yeah. It definitely diminishes it a little bit, and it's going to get a big push. Like especially with his passing. Unfortunately, but let's see what the league does. Let's see. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with this. And but I'm with you. Like at this point, like if you haven't let him in, unfortunately he's passed away. Like just leave him out. And deal whatever you got to deal with. Like you've been dealing with it for almost 30 years at this point.
Yeah, so, we thank you guys for watching us. Let us know what you think about this situation. Let us know your Pete Rose memories. Um, you can follow us, like, subscribe on our YouTube channel. You follow us on Twitter at Bigger Game Pod, on Instagram at Bigger Game Pod. So for the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jose Ruiz, I'm Deremy Dove. Thank you guys for watching Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose.
Peace.